What's up? Let me go turn off that fan. This way it's so not so noisy. Hopefully get a decent turnout quickly, because I don't want to be on too long tonight. Oh man, am I tired. Definitely been a long day for me, that's for sure. Let me see. Send it into the chat so that the people know I'm live. Live now. No, not love. This thing's funny. Now, autocorrect fail. /@FK8TD. There we go. Make sure that that link works. And it do. Shows me picking up a can of ginger ale. That's my holiday spirits. Yeah, this is going to be an interesting topic. Because I know somebody's going to say something crazy like, let's do this on stock motor, stock head. Not. Happy Thanksgiving to you too, man. And everybody else who's logged in at the moment. Loki, what are you doing? Come here. Come here. Why are you staring at me like I'm the weird one? You're the one standing in the hallway looking at the wall. What's up, man? Happy Thanksgiving. Wait a few minutes, the usual, for everybody to pile in here, or however many people are going to show up. We'll see. I've got to say, I know a lot of people, and I think this is interesting, is a lot of people said that Kelford Stage 1 cams were the same thing as TR2 cams. And it's not even close. They're not the same at all. They're very different camshaft. Definitely different camshaft. Not anything. The behavior, the cam timing, VTEC crossover, the power output, like they're nothing similar between those two camshafts, other than somewhat similar specifications. Who is messaging me? Oh, looks like junk mail. Or junk. Yeah, junk. What is this? What is this? Is probably spam. Yeah, looks like they're trying to spam money out of me. I like when they do that. Apparently my name is Alejandro Aldana. Apparently. Yeah, I don't understand. What? Oh, wait a minute. Oh, never mind. I correct myself on this. I know what this is. Never mind. Never mind. Apologize for the name. Nope. Didn't mean to put my customer's name out there. That's what this is. It's a link to my store that I put up. So, my apologies if I said the customer's name. I try not to do that. Anyway. What the heck happened? I just lost everybody. Everybody was here a minute ago and they're all gone. It just disappeared, unless the stats are wrong. Everybody's still here? Or did I lose everybody in one shot? No, it came back. Never mind. I don't know what's going on with YouTube lately. It's like people are getting booted and put back on and booted and put back on. It says I have 10 viewers, then it said I had 0. I don't know what's going on there. YouTube's been acting weird. Yeah, everybody's still there. So, tuning Kelford cams. I've got to say, without a doubt, you can't tune anything bigger and successfully tune it on Honda. So let me just get that out of the way. Anything bigger, you're going to run into some serious problems. Getting to 650 wheel horsepower, it's a tall order. It is a tall order to do something like that. I can tell you, let's start out, put the first thing out the window. You're not going to get there on something like 93 octane and methanol. Doesn't matter how much cylinder head you have on it. Doesn't matter how much camshaft you have in it. And doesn't matter how much turbocharger you have in it. I don't see that happening. Not on stock block anyway. Not without doing some serious damage. So, the first thing is, I think the best way to get here successfully without straining the car is going to be the ported head and the cams. And I've said it time and time again. Can you get to 650? I want to say on this dyno, okay? I'm going to say just this dyno. I'm not going to say on another dyno. I'm going to say on this dyno, stock motor without ported head or without cams, without both. I don't think you can get there. The reason I say this is because just to get to 600 with cams, it takes, on this dyno, it takes like 32 pounds or more with cams. And that's a lot. That's a tall ask. So to get to another 50 wheel horsepower and still keep the torque in a place that an engine will live, I don't see that happening. I think the two most viable ways to get there, I won't say that a TR2 cam can't do it. You probably could, but they make power a little bit earlier in the power band. I think it would take a little bit more boost to get there. But I also think that, like, you want to be able to make torque as late as possible, and you might be able to make it, but not. You put more torque in it, I would think. If you did a G3770, I think you'd have to put more torque in it, and I don't think it would likely live as long, right? So, the next thing is, so the G3770, maybe put a 101 housing in it, but then you're going to make it just as lazy as a G3900, so buy a G3900. So, but you could do it either way with a G3770 or a G3900. I don't think you can do it with a prototype 7 Series or any other drop-in turbo that's out there. Can you do it with an XDI pump in 2000cc injectors? Maybe you'd get close, but I don't see that happening. Because generally I see, even with upgraded in-tank stuff, we start to tap out around 610 to 625. So, if you want to do DI only, the only answer might literally be a full race pump, and 2000cc injectors might literally be the only answer to get there on DI only, and the ported head and cams and either a G3770 or a G3900. But there's more to this, right? Like, you can't have any exhaust that has a 2.5-inch connection anywhere. So, like, you can't have a Tomei Type D. You can't have an AWE where at the front pipe it connects down to a 2.5. So you can't have that either, right? So that's not going to work. Because we're on ethanol, we can get away with something like a PRL intercooler. You can get away with it, but the downside is the temperature climb at the high RPM, you lose some turbo efficiency. So at some point that's going to run into a wall, but this is where the ported head and the cams come in because you're not throwing as much boost at it. So since you're not throwing as much boost at it, well, that's how you get there. So I really do think though, for to do 650 at the tire on 28 and a half pounds is even went beyond my expectations. I really didn't think it'd get there that easily. I really didn't see that coming. I really thought that it would easily be north. It would have to be north of 31 pounds to get there. I really did. And there was definitely room in the system on that car. The clutch, and I don't think the stock bottom end would take it. I really just think it would be that simple. It just won't take it. So the formula is pretty simple. You got to have a good intercooler, a full 3-inch exhaust. Maybe, I don't know how a 27 want to do. You can't have a chambered muffler, right? That's not going to work. And then you got to have at least 2,000 cc injectors and XDI pump. You're not going to get there with a regular set of injectors unless you put a whole crap load of methanol in there. Oh, I appreciate the idea, Brian, but I just don't. I don't have a thing for that in my YouTube. I never set up a thing for sending money. So, but thank you. Appreciate it. I don't know, I just never did that. So, but that pretty much gives you most of the formula, right? You need at least a Kelford Stage 1 or a TR2. You need a G3770 or a G3900. And basically, and you're going to need, I would recommend a full race pump. Now, he did not have an in-tank assembly upgrade, but the full race pump is so big that if the pressure feeding the pump drops some, it can tolerate it better than an XDI pump can tolerate it. So that's why that combination actually worked with that, not needing to feed the high pressure pump as well, because the full race pump just does really good high RPM. So what's the lowest torque that you can aim to make 650 horsepower? Here's the thing. That is kind of relevant to your RPM, right? So if you want to make 650, and this is to the tire, but you try to do it at 7,000 RPM, you're going to probably blow something up. So, let me just, 650 divided by 7,000 times 52. You'd have to make, if you wanted to do it at 7,000 RPM, you'd have to make 487 foot-pounds of torque to the tire. So you can do it with a G3770, but you're probably not going to have your engine or clutch or your transmission survive, right? None of those parts are going to hold up. The trick to the reason that this worked in this setup was because I knew that the G3900 would enable us to push the torque out further. So even if we go out, so let's say I like to keep around 450 torque tops, right, in the high RPM, right, and on a dyno jet. Hub dyno, I'll go higher. So if we do at 7,000 RPM for 450 torque, divided by that, we end up at about 600 horsepower at 450 torque at 7,000. Now, if we can make that torque later with a more high RPM efficient setup, right? If we just go out to 7,500 RPM, now we're at 642. So the problem with the G3770 is you're going to have a hard time making power way out towards 8,000 RPM. So you're going to have to push the motor a lot harder to get there. If you can make, so the thing is, if we could, which I know we can't, not with this turbo, it's honestly not even big enough. If we were able to go that same torque out to 8,000 RPM, we'd be looking at 685 to the tire. Do we need to change the pins with? No, it's not a Gokum. It's not a matter of, we don't change pins with the Kelford Stage 1. We add limiter pins. That's what we're doing. We're adding limiter pins. This just keeps us from retarding or advancing either cam to the point where we come into piston to valve contact. So if you choose to do without them, that's a huge risk on your end. I don't do it. I'm going to tell you, using the OEM ECU, the more you change the overlap, the more you change the way the fuel functions, the further out of line your fueling gets. So either way, I wouldn't do it without it. I wouldn't go trying to go that route to do it without phase limiter pins. Let me see if I can pull up. Let me check. Phase limiter. This will just be a good old fashioned picture. Although this is not our particular. Where is it? What the hell is that? Oh, advertisement. I was like, what the hell is that? So, here is a VCT gear, and we can see in here that this hole here, this gear moves through the command of the variable cam timing, and we will put a pin in here to block it. This is not a Honda cam gear, but the cam gears function on all the same principle. This is a GM, this is a LS cam gear. And what they'll do, in this case, this is a huge block-off pin. This stops it from moving. But we don't use something that big, right? We'll use a smaller pin so we have a limit on how far it goes. Happy Thanksgiving. I thank you, everybody. I really appreciate that, man. It's just nice, everybody. So, you know, and that's why the pin's there, so that we just don't have the risk. Because while it might clear, the other thing that you run into is stack tolerances and more heat, and you'll have more expansion of parts. So you might clear at lower RPM. So one thing I gotta say is, this is definitely also another thing is that I didn't mention earlier. You have to have valve train to do this. You cannot do this on stock valve train. Like, you cannot do this on stock valve train. There's no question about it. It'll never hold up. You will absolutely destroy something. So, so I would say, if you want to get there minimalistically, let's say you already have 2000 cc injectors, an XDI pump, and you don't want to go and spend $2,000 on a full race pump, I'm going to straight tell you, just throw about 750 cc of methanol at it, and that should be enough to take up that last 20 or 30 horsepower you need to get there. You know? And it's like, I gotta say though, another thing with the Kelfer cams, it just didn't take as much boost. It really didn't. See, Brian, that question is a double-edged sword. Maximum safe power for stock valve train. It's a double-edged sword because you can turn around and you can kill parts on a stock valve train by simply revving a turbo with too much back pressure too high. Perfect example. The P700 generates a lot of back pressure. You can break valve train parts by revving that to 8,000 RPM, right? Real easily. Even if you've got springs and retainers, right? You can break rockers and other things. So you can hurt the valve train on... You're less likely to hurt stock valve train on a larger turbo with a bigger turbine wheel, on a bigger hot side, like the RV6, R660, G3770, the Prototype 7 Series, G3900, a G3660. All of those, you can take the stock valve train to like 7,600 RPM. So generally though, somewhere around 550, and again, we're talking over here, I'm not talking about somebody else's dyno. Generally 550 in those larger size turbos are about what it takes to be in an area where you're not going to hurt something. So anything beyond that. So cam intake manifold. What must be the first upgrade? No, see, Gokum, I didn't say intake manifold. I said ported cylinder head. You could pull this same thing off with a stock intake manifold, but just going to take a little more boost. JT Performance, what percentage ethanol, and is it still running a mass airflow sensor? It's on 50% ethanol. Probably could put more ethanol in it, but it wasn't really needed. Anything above 50% doesn't really make any more power. It's more of a heat management thing. And until you get closer to 700, more ethanol isn't kind of required for heat management. No, the car does not have a mass airflow sensor. Ported head and cams, you're never going to be able to run a mass airflow sensor successfully without having some wild problems. So, and can this be done on full ethanol? It can, but you would need to do 2500 cc direct injectors. Then you absolutely need to upgrade the in-tank pump assembly. But then at some point you start to sacrifice how the car drives on pump gas. So, what's up, Juan? Man, more people are joining in, and the curiosity hits. So, I think I should I gave most of the rundown in the Instagram post about the parts that are really kind of needed. Thanks, man, appreciate it. So, I can only claim it's a dyno jet number record. I can't claim any other particular dynos, but as far as I know, I don't know of anyone else on a dyno jet making that power. So, remains to be seen any more than that. So, I mean, maybe there's something out there, but I just haven't seen it. F05s make with stock in-tank fuel pump, not going for super soon want to starve the motor. Well, it's the same thing you do on a regular FK. It's no different. Like 470 is about as far as it goes. XDI doesn't make a 1450cc. Unless you're saying XDI pump and a 1450cc injector? Is that what you're saying? Just do me a favor. That one particular individual, Detailed Realism, ask you not to bring up that name in this chat I have my reasons. So, I just don't want to get into the details, but what you're looking at right there, what that makes over here, it's on that particular setup with a stock in-tank pump, you're still going to be at 470 or less here. I'm just going to say, if you're still trying to run that, it's just not going to get any higher than that. Welcome. Have a good night, man. No, it's fine. just all I'm going to say is I used to do a lot of the tuning for him and tell him how to set everything up. And I mean every car, every setup, what worked and what didn't. That's all I'm going to say. I'm going to leave it at that. We parted ways for very good reasons. I decided to say I'm not dealing with them anymore. So that's all I'm going to say. How's that RV6 turbo with the 7 series, whatever? Saw your video, made good power. Do you think it could make 650 and port ahead in Kelford Stage 2 cams? One, you can't do Kelford Stage 2 cams on Honda, so that's a no. And two, the turbo, the problem with the Prototype 7 Series is the compressor housing's just not big enough. So, what's the best way to put this? Trying to think of this. Well, here's the easiest way to look at it, right? Let's say the compressor wheel is the lungs of an Olympic athlete, right? And a regular G30 770 is a regular Olympic athlete with his mouth wide open running. And you turn around and you put a straw in his mouth and you restrict about 30% of the guy's breathing. He might be an Olympic athlete with a great set of lungs, but now he can't go as fast. That's the downside to stock location. So unfortunately, I don't think you're going to see 650 to the tire on that particular turbo. 620, 625, maybe even 630, but I don't see 650 to the tire happening on that particular turbo. Did I tune and log my car? My car, it doesn't matter if it's summer or winter. I got fuel for days. I mean, I have enough with the port injection on top of the direct injection, because I had a port injection fairly recently. I have enough fuel for I think I did the math, 1,300 to the tire. So I don't even worry about that stuff. I'm not worried about these cars, but since I'm using an air charge based system, there's not as much variance in power throughout the seasons, and I always leave some leeway. Sky goes, can you run full E85 on 2000cc injectors like I would be able to on port injection? Yes, you can, but you can't run more than 550 on full E. At least, let me rephrase this, with an XDI pump. So that would be, I don't know what the limit is on full race. I did, with a little bit of room to spare on Carlos's car, 546. But he has the intake assembly to feed the XDI pump, because like I said, as soon as you start reducing the amount of fuel fed to the XDI pump, it doesn't tolerate as well as the full race pump. Does Tuner Nerd only has a 650cc nozzle? So, Brian, instead of what you're saying for 4 650cc nozzles, that's overkill. That's way too much. Whoa. You don't need that much. If you're doing one nozzle, yeah, but if you're doing 4 nozzles, that's way too much. If you're trying to do direct port for direct port methanol, that's way, I don't even know if you can control that. But it's just a methanol nozzle. Well, yeah, they do have that extended nozzle. No, I would just, the 250, there's a reason the 250cc is probably sold out. So, I would ask RV6, because he gave me a prototype methanol plate, but I told him, I said, yeah, all we had to do was angle the nozzles a little bit and the thing was golden. Bring him a little bit more vertical. So I don't know why he didn't finish up with that, because the plate, the machining was good, the alignment was good, the size of the ports were good. The only thing was the angle needed to change just a little, just so that the nozzle could sit a little bit deeper in the in the actual design so the spray wouldn't hit the edges. So I would ask RV6 if Rich is finished with that. So and I can't, and again, like I've been telling everybody else, so that's another car. The Accord has the same thing, same problem the FK8 has. The stock head just flows so little. Those benefit extremely well. Ironically enough, the Accords, although you don't need, because of the automatic, I don't know if you got an automatic or not, but the automatic's like, you don't, what's the word I'm looking for? So, because of the automatic and the way the Accord automatic loads up, when automatic transmission loads up the engine, they do a lot better job of spooling a turbo. So if you got an automatic Accord, you guys can get away with a bigger turbo than you'd really be surprised. Like, you can get away, if you got a ported head, you can literally shove a G30 770 on there, man, and you guys don't even gotta think about lag. You know, even if it's that size, you know, you don't have, your camshaft is different too, though. So the Accord camshaft is very different. It favors spool better than the Type R does. So the Accord guys got some advantages when it comes down to that automatic. The only thing they didn't do, if they could just make the automatic shift later, you know, you guys would really be set. And fuel system. So Ariel, that's I wouldn't say a reliable versus not more reliable. I mean, so here's the thing. That same car has been at 450 torque for an entire year, but at low RPM. So it's kind of so here's what happens with RPM. When you put torque in a higher RPM, it's actually slightly less actual physical pressure on the rods, right? But the thing that you end up with more wear from RPM is more like area wear as far as cylinder wall wear and things of that nature, right? So when you're in higher RPM, it's harder to keep like the pistons and piston rings and that stuff cool down. So you have to run ethanol up in that high RPM and or run it richer. And if you look at the graph, when you guys go look back at that graph up at 7,000, it dips down a little and then comes back up. That's because right at 7,000, there's more fuel at it, and there's different cam timing to deal with cylinder temperatures. So while that is making a lot of power, it's making the same torque it made for the last year on the other turbo. So reliability is a question of, well, is the valve train going to hold together? Why not? Like, we've got the valve train set up correctly. We don't have a lot of back pressure. We're not having to run a lot of boost to get there. So whether that's reliable anymore or any less, because making 516 or making 650, if you're still making the same amount of torque, you have reliable in different ways, right? So the lower RPM torque is harder, technically harder on the rods, right? And harder on the bearings, technically, rods and bearings, right? But the RPM is not as hard on like other components that are wearing via like piston wall, right? And valve train components. So what's reliable more than the other, you know, at higher RPMs, a little harder on synchros, right? But then if you're loading up a transmission of really low RPM, that initial surge, if the surge of torque is a lot harder, you're hitting the trans a lot harder, right? You know, there's a whole lot of terms for reliable, because, you know, you can make 450 torque anywhere in a rev range, and technically it's more reliable to make it later. So I don't know if you really say that it's not reliable, you know. It's also maintenance and user. So I mean, if you want to keep it like ultra reliable, I'd say like 420 torque, and wherever you make the power, you make the power. That is where I would say if you want to keep it ultra reliable, you know, and don't you try to put too much RPM into a turbo that can't breathe out of the exhaust. You know, and that's what I'd say. You know, because you can make. I mean, my one customer that has Type R in Florida, he's over 600. He's got 92,000 miles or something like that on the block. So he was my first stock block over 600 years ago. So but he's got a G30 770. He's got cams. So it's a kind of hard question, you know. Yeah, that's another thing. You don't beat the shit out of it every single second of every day, you know? See, here's the thing. I hear a lot of people say all sorts of stuff like, oh, well, I had what was it? It's an RSX Type S, and I made 500 to the tire, and I'm on the stock motor, and I've had it that way for 4 years. But we don't know if maybe that guy gets on it once a month for 4 years, right? So he gets on it 48 times. And there are guys that get on their car and bang the rev limiter 48 times in a week. So, that's like, I've seen guys blow up on 450 horsepower. And I've seen guys make 600 in the last years. It's so hard to sit there and say, what's the most reliable setup, you know? Honestly, like, yeah, guys blow them up bone stock, which I haven't figured that out. I don't know what those guys are doing. The guys that blow them up bone stock. Brian, 530 oil isn't even enough. Yeah. Okay, so I should actually go over something in oil when it comes down to thinning out, alright? Whenever they change any sort of additive to make it a multi-weight oil, 5W30 is a multi-weight oil, which means when it's cold, thank you, Angel, happy Thanksgiving. When it's cold, it flows as if it was a cold 5-weight oil. So what happens is when parts like timing chains are constantly, because that timing chain's metal on metal, right? So when those parts are in constant heavy contact, you know, camshaft against an actual roller rocker, that's straight out heavy contact, heavy pressure. That heavy pressure tears those polymers apart. And as those polymers get torn apart, they literally break down the weight of the oil. So, in your case, a 0W20 turned into a 16 weight oil. If you look at that, that's a 20% breakdown in oil weight. That's a huge gap. And that follows through. You know, there's been testing of Porsches that they're 5W40 and as little as 500 miles, okay, will break down to a 30 weight. So that's why anything that I say, anything making north of 450, anything 500, I'm gonna say a 40 weight oil. That's where I'm gonna go with that, right? That's the first thing I'm gonna say is go to like a 40 weight oil. Anything north of 500, go to a 40 weight oil. If it's the dead middle of winter, okay, maybe not, right? Right? Anything 500 and north of, you definitely shouldn't be changing your oil at 3,000 miles. You'd be changing it, honestly, 2,500, 2,000 miles. You know, these are the things that makes parts live. So if you've got, perfect example, you said 1,800 miles, it broke down to a 16 weight from the oil analysis. What do you think that would do to an engine making 650 to the tire? You know, that's when you start getting into crazy amount of breakdown. The more power you make, the more load all sorts of components have, right? Heavier valve train, you got heavier wear on all the other components, right? On the other oils, like if you got heavier springs and retainers, right? and the bigger cam. A bigger cam, you have more lift. So as you lift, you have more lift under a load. So a Kelford Springer retainer, right? That's 85 on the seat and 185 at right before coil bind, right? So if you have a stock cam, you'll have 85 on the seat, but you're not getting anywhere near 185 on lift, right? But if you have a Kelford Stage 2, yeah, you're getting a lot closer to that 185 on lift. So, and the Ferrea is 75 and 175. So it's 75 on the seat and 175, I think it's right before coil bind also. So take those factors into that scenario, and then you take a situation where a car that revs 8,000 RPM, it's not a matter of you're worrying about the oil because of you're not changing that often because you're worried about like that oil is just not going to cut it for just the bearings. You're worried about changing that oil so that this way it doesn't break. You don't have that breakdown in viscosity, which is what really protects you. And if you're really worried about, oh, it's so thin, it's not going to flow to the bearings and this and that, guys, I run 15W50 and my main bearing clearance is like a tiny bit bigger than OEM. It's not huge. My rod bearing clearances are huge, but my cam journal clearances don't change. That doesn't change at all, and I had zero problems. All you gotta do is just let it warm up. Don't go above 3,000 RPM when you're driving, and wait for your idle oil pressure to come down. This way your parts have taken time to expand so that you know that you're getting a good large quantity of oil through the components. It's really just that simple when you're running a heavier oil. I'm not sure. I've heard this rumor, and I'm not sure if it's true or not, but I know that there are some stock motor classes, and supposedly these guys run 2050 race oil in the stock motor class. So, in circuit racing, the stock power level classes. I don't know if that's true or not, but I would imagine with an endurance race of some sort that they do. And especially if a thing like an oil cooler, you have to run a heavier oil because you don't want to lose pressure. Well, in my opinion, what ethanol blend has made the most power, that's completely relevant to setup. Completely relevant to setup. Yeah, Ariel, it's fine, I guess, just for a tune, but, the hotter it gets, that's the other thing. The more power you make, the more heat you make, everywhere, the hotter the oil gets, no matter what. And it's not from friction in the sense of friction to the bearings, right? It's in friction in all the other components. The timing chain, the cylinder walls are getting hotter when you're making more power. The pistons are getting hotter, so there's more heat transfer coming from the piston oil squirter, because it's squirting under the bottom of the piston's getting hotter. Oh, yeah, that was another thing. Somebody says here, perfect example. They say that, heavier oil, your oil temps will get higher. That's not true either. Your oil temps are not going to get hotter because you've got to a heavier oil. That's not how that works. What you can do damage with heavier oil is if you go out and you just go mash on it. And it's not so much that you're going to do damage because of the heavy oil. You're going to do damage because the parts haven't expanded yet. Right? You don't have that gap in your components yet where the heat makes things expand. That's how you'll do damage on oil. I never understood, all you gotta do is wait for it to get hot. We don't have an oil pump that's sensitive to snapping or breaking, right? It's not like we're taking a stock Mustang Coyote motor, right, and turning around, right, a Coyote motor with a stock oil pump trying to make 800 horsepower and putting, a freaking straight 50 weight oil in it, right? Because those are known to break, right? And those pumps are a totally different design than what we have. Our pumps are in a separate housing. The Coyote pumps are right off of that crank driven, essentially, off the snout of the crank. So Same thing with the SIs. Throw off the snout of the crank. And the actual SI pumps that are an upgrade, they actually have a larger tolerance gap between inside the pump gears to allow for movement. That's what breaks those oil pumps. Yeah, guys, the acuity shifter, and honestly, so here's the thing. I feel like the acuity shifter, I've heard so many mixed different things about it, right? And I have to tell you that for me, and thank you to Chris's actually idea. It was funny. They make a stubby height shift knob. So I have a 21 shifter with my detent springs, right? The stubby height shift knob and the bushings on the cables. And I think it's great. I don't think you need any more than that. I really don't think you need any more than that. You know, the only other shifter that I hear is phenomenal is that CAE shifter. I only mentioned, so it's not that the Honda pump's not bad, it just doesn't have, there's no one, in order for the Honda high pressure pump to make higher horsepower, you need the Honda cam, right? You need a 5mm lobe cam, and that puts you out in an area where you're stuck on stock lift on the exhaust and intake, right? There's no way to upgrade to a camshaft to help with making more horsepower. So, you know, it's, oh, there's one other thing I did to the stock shifter, and that was the acuity, the swing arm, right? I need nothing else. And a lot of people are really surprised when I tell them that that's a stock assembly shifter there, right? Your fluid and the bushings and the tightness of everything matter more, because you say FL5, but the FL5 already has a way better setup, and the FL5 has better internal transmission components. The shifter gates have been changed, and there's actual changes in the FL5 transmission internally. There's bearings in there that are changed. There's different part numbers on the actual gears, even though they have the same tooth counts and ratios. There's actual different parts in the FL5, so the FL5 stands different from the FK8. So that is, I mean, that's a fact. That's definitely different. Yeah, so when they say the lift on the cam, meaning just for the high pressure cam lift, the full race, let me put it to you this way, the full race pump is so big in the high RPM that the pump duty cycle to make 650 was in the 50s, okay? It didn't even get into the 60s in percentage wise. Even on my car, I don't run at a high pressure pump. I ran out of frickin' injector again on a 2500cc injector. The high pressure pump on the full race is way big enough. The part where it shines, though, like any other high pressure pump, the part where that pump shines is in the high RPM. That's where it shines, in the high RPM. And honestly, the pump control is better. I know I hate to say this, but it is what it is. The pump control is better in Honda, in the OEM computer, than it is in my Motec. So I can literally, and the reason I say this is because in the OEM ECU, the amount of open time that solenoid has to allow fuel in is variable. In Motec, we have a set pulse width to open that thing to make that pump run. So if I want good high RPM control in the Motec, I have to sacrifice low RPM fuel. which sucks, but it is what it is. So, but with Honda, I don't have to do that, which is because, so basically, that kind of power range across the board, that pump never saw more than 60% duty cycle, making 650 to the tire, which is like, what? And there was still, some injector left at that point, but to what point, that there's how much pressure and other things, there's other variables. Well, I've been saying it since I tested it. The full race pump is huge. It's huge. You can run more, it has a higher pressure capability, it has a higher pressure relief valve. The one place I'm going to say that I wouldn't run that pump, okay? Because I'm just going to be honest. Like, to be honest with everything I can and everything else, I can be as forthcoming as I can. Is I would not run that pump if you're trying to go to 8,000 RPM and you're on like a race gas or of some sort, where you have a very little need for as much duty cycle, right, or open time or fuel demand. I was just saying earlier, tune-wise, temperature-wise in the winter, you're actually kind of better to do it. There's more demand on the car in the winter than there is in the summer. So during the summer, if anything, the worst thing that happens during the summer is it makes less power. So I'm always careful about how I tune my cars. So with the right time of year in the summer, you can actually make numbers essentially appear bigger than they are. Because if you're fuel system limited, but you're not fully turbo limited, you can make a legit, let's just put it this way, if I make 530 uncorrected, and then it's hot out, and I still make legit 530 to the tire, but it's correcting for heat, and I'm limited on fuel at 530, am I really making 530? So, because there's correction factor. And since King Kong wants me to bring it up, I'll tell you what the correction factor took off the numbers. It went from 653 to 650 when I put uncorrected. I just forgot to print it out as uncorrected. It was like 3 horsepower difference. So I forgot to put it on uncorrected. So, guys, that was legit 650 to the tire. Which is also why I've been saying the stock clutch doesn't really take more than 450 torque, right? If it was the summer, right, and I put the same amount of actual power to it, and it was like, 100 degrees out, which is, plausible, and you're going to look at like a 6% correction, that would have read almost 700 in the middle of summer. Oh, yeah, well, so for you track cars, those are tuned entirely different. I'll run them way richer than they need to be. .650 wheel horsepower is sustainable if you are not pounding the ever-living crap out of it. And you're not hitting the rev limiter. Because, just look at it this way. Would you two-step a stock bottom end car in a drag race scenario? No. Well, what do you think hitting the rev limiter is doing on 30 pounds of boost? You're cutting the ignition, you have a lot of load on the car, and engine's in an unbalanced situation. So, one, avoid the rev limiter. The availabilities, you have to go to my booking is done all through the website. So the availability and times and dates are all listed there. So you'd have to go to the website, fkt.com. You purchase a tune there, and then there's links for an appointment to another website, which I do all my bookings through. So, well, that's what where the availabilities are, and the time frames. the there's a whole lot of factors involved there, right? Changing your oil, using the right weight oil, understanding that you're not going to go 10,000 miles on a set of spark plugs anymore, right? Changing the transmission fluid is the engine is more sustainable time wise than the transmission and the clutch. Yeah, Sky Ghost, it's the same exact car, man. It's the same exact car that I literally took apart live on camera. That is the same car. He says, wait, I can't go 25,000 miles on my spark plugs? No. No, you can't. No, you can't. That's another thing I look at. You know, heat, RPM, you know, spark plugs, more spark events. These guys. You know, those are all things to take into consideration. You know? So, well, now that he's got a better tire on it, you realize that there's not as much torque as I wanted to put in it down low. But, as soon as it hits 5,500 RPM, right about, man, I kind of, so, that should be a pretty good reference point. Let me see this, because I have to go look at this. 5,500 RPM. So, at 5,500 RPM, it's about 410 foot-pounds of torque. That is literally right where the tires start to crack loose now. But it is a little bit cooler out this time of year. So there's a little bit of that. You know, the temperature-wise, the cooler, the tires don't stick quite as good right now. Yeah, but you've been driving on it for like a few miles, so it didn't help. But basically, once the clutch is in it, I can put more torque in it down low. The car will be a lot quicker, actually. It's fast now. It's fast. It'll do sixes now, but it's just not worth beating on a clutch that's weak. So, and let's say so. There's a lot that goes into it, right? Like, if you were running a G3770, that is literally going to strain the other components harder because you're going to run more boost. So, there's other things that happen too, guys. When you start running this kind of power, right? The first thing you do, like, whether people realize it or not, right? And this was one of the things I learned a long time ago. When you start making like 600 horsepower to the tire in a 4-cylinder, shit just starts coming loose at random. Like, you can literally torque every nut and bolt in the car, and you're going to find out that you might have to put thread locker on things that you never had to put thread locker on before. So, because there's the amount of, it's violent. I'm just going to say it's violent. It's very violent to make that much power per cylinder. Because if you look at it this way, right, we lose about, I want to say about 10%, right, to the tire. So, if we're losing about 10% through the drivetrain, right, you're looking at 715 to the crankshaft, right? Dude, that's 178 horsepower per cylinder. There are plenty cars out, plenty 4-cylinder cars out that exist today that don't even make that to the cylinder now for 4 cylinders. I mean, think about it. I mean, that's a lot of, I mean, man, could you imagine, right? Like, okay, so perfectly imagine that, right? Let's did that. All right, let's did it times an 8-cylinder, right? Could you imagine? Think about it. How much shit would need thread locker in a 1,400 horsepower at the crank Mustang? Shit wants to come apart. We're really starting to push the limits of this stuff, man. So that is just something that, you know, you need to keep in mind, though, you know, going forward when they start getting to the bigger power, right? Couplers want to come loose that you had tight. You know, just little things. You find out that perfect example is for a while the one of the brackets on the Rampage kits used to come powder coated, right? And just the heat and vibration from that, the nut would back off, right? So now there's no more powder coating on it, right? So that's no longer there, right? I've seen it. I mean, there's just all sorts of stuff that just happens, right? So another thing that happened, this happened to me. I had a Rampage manifold for years, right? And the amount of heat that went through it, the expansion, shrink, the actual manifold, even though it's solid stainless, all right, literally started splitting. It split 3/4 of the way around. They could just literally split 3/4 of the way around. I could not believe it. And you're talking about solid stainless. This is made from one solid piece of stainless steel. But that's what happens when you start making crazy horsepower. I don't think it'll really be a problem with his, but when you start getting north of 750, you got to start looking out for stuff like that. Stuff breaks that you would swear would never break. I mean, like I said, I'll go over for those who didn't catch the setup earlier, how to get there. Here's what I'm going to say. You got to have either a G3770, a G3900. You definitely got to have a ported head. And you definitely got to have either a Kelford Stage 1 or a TR2 camshaft. If you want to do it on DI only, DI only, you're going to need the full race pump, 2000cc injectors, and at the very least the DW300C on the in-tank. You're going to need the AN line upgrades from the flex fuel kit to the pump, and you're going to need the tank feed line. You're going to need a true 3-inch exhaust. The muffler cannot be a chambered muffler like you have the NVIDIA Q series. Then you have the R400. The R400, straight through design. You have to have that. Any muffler, any exhaust cannot have a 2.5-inch reduction anywhere in the whole exhaust. You can't have a valved exhaust. You must have an intercooler that can flow the air. However, I recommend Mishimoto. But the PRL gets hotter, so it's definitely not going to do as good in the summer. And I think, am I missing anything? No, I think that pretty much covers all the components that are like pretty much a must to get there and still have where you're not restricted a lot somewhere. So, and I gotta say, like those are the parts that the list of the parts that are there that are a must. And if you try to do it on like a prototype 7 series, let's say you get close, right? Something's got to give, right? Something's got to break at some point, right? Because there's no component in his car right now. The injectors are not at the max. The high pressure pump's not at the max. The turbo's not at the max. The cylinder head's not at the max, right? The only thing that's on the max right now is the clutch. It's 100%. The clutch is at the edge. So as long as your components, that your ability to make power isn't constricted to a way that you're on the limit, right? If you're on the limit of the turbo, something's got to give, right, at some point. So it just means if you're at the limit of the turbo, you're either going to overspin it, or there's back pressure because of it, or you're making a lot more hot air from having the compressor wheel not being as efficient. So those are the things. So as long as you know there's good amount of headroom where you left off, there's likely a chance that what you're doing isn't completely detrimental to the car, right? So that car made power so easy, right? I went from, for those of you who understand the air charge system, I went from a 230 air charge to a 235 air charge, and it picked up, I think it was like 18 horsepower. I was just like, what? Wait, let me see. I'll tell you exactly. Yeah, it was. I'm going to correct my, yeah. So, no. Wait, yeah. Did it pick up? Sorry, it picked up 14 horsepower. And the boost barely changed. It picked up 14 horsepower from raising the air charge from a 230 to a 235. It literally was making that. Buddy, you are on. If you want to make power on pump gas, that is not the way. You're not going to be happy with that. I have been over this before. Pump gas is never going to make more than high 300s torque, and that's a really hard way to get there. Don't expect more than like low fives on pump gas, even with cams in the head. And the other thing with pump gas that's hugely important, okay, becomes 10 times as more important is an intercooler. A good intercooler. If you're even thinking about making power on pump gas, you need either a Mishimoto, an Ultimate Racing, or the Reggie-Built intercooler. Those are your three options if you're even thinking about making power on pump gas only. And with a Praktworks manifold, that's going to make your life even harder. Because that is not where you want to make the power. You do not want to make it early. You want to make it as late as humanly possible. So, here's what I say about the whole black and silver intercooler colors and all that stuff. Here's what I'm going to say about that. Alright? Black absorbs heat. The amount of heat dissipation that you're actually going to gain, because black will also absorb heat in the sun, alright? The amount of heat dissipation you're going to gain by painting your intercooler black in actual real-world usage is so negligible. It's only in the case that there's no air moving over your intercooler does that have any value whatsoever. The moment you paint an intercooler, you are literally reducing the ability to dissipate heat through the fins. The reason they paint the intercooler is to reduce the corrosion and corrosion resistance to it. So they want to paint it as thin as humanly possible. So there's a double-edged sword to painting an intercooler, because it does just as much of a job of keeping it in. So I really don't think color matters in that scenario. I really don't. Because as soon as sunlight hits it, though, that's going to be your worst enemy. So I don't think color really matters there. There's a double-edged sword with that one. But he did have injectors. So Brian, he had injectors. That's injectors in a high-pressure line and a DW300C. So he did not have a fuel pump. So that much he had. Oof. I mean, if it's an SI intercooler, I don't know if that that doesn't have as much of a relevance of the SI because it's weird. The SI has a much more appropriately sized intercooler for what you're doing when they have the PRL versus the Mishimoto. Alright, man, take it easy. Yeah, well, there's nothing stealth about his car now because you hear it coming now. As soon as you give it any throttle, you hear the turbo. Like, it's so obvious. I just wouldn't use a PRL intercooler on the Type R. It's way too small. Here's what I'm going to say. If you want a lot of power below 4,000 RPM on a G3900, you're not going to get it. If you want a lot of power below 4,000 RPM on a G3770, you're not going to get it, right? Who the hell wants to be like fast there? You know? I'm starting to get to my limit though, guys. I'm tired, man. I think I'm the only idiot who worked on Thanksgiving. No, I'm almost... Yeah, the turbo is loud. Let me rephrase this. This turbo is loud. The car has a very deep tone to it, right? So, I want to say, for those of you who don't know, right, porting the head does increase the sound output of the car. If you have an R400 exhaust, it just makes it sound deeper. It doesn't really get a crap load louder, right? You have a much deeper tone to it. It definitely sounds like the engine is larger. There's no raspiness to it unless you have like a Tomei Type D. And even then, it's just, well, I think those are not exhausts are just loud. That's another thing I gotta maintain. Like, the reason I keep going back to that exhaust is simply the fact that, especially under heavy load, like, it doesn't sound like the car is working hard, ever. It never does. It never sounds like it's working hard. Well, if anybody got any questions, man, I think I'm just about all out of energy. Well, thank you everybody who joined. So, I know it seems wild. I know some cars are out there with crazy, dropping turbo numbers. But again, like I said, I don't know. This car on a hub dyno would have read stupid numbers. So, but who knows what it would have read on a hub dyno. Would have loved to know. Maybe one day we'll find a way to go to the dyno. So, to hub dyno. So, ladies and germs, have a good night, and happy Thanksgiving and happy holidays.